no time to talk. Music loud and women warm. I've been kicked around since I was born. You know it's alright, it's okay. You can look the other way. We can try to understand the New York Times effect on men. Whether you're a brother or whether you're a mother, you stay alive.
Hello and welcome back to another Staying Alive podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got another fantastic special guest joining us. But before we introduce our special guest on this podcast, where are we coming from? Well, we're coming from Australia, of course. And who's presenting this podcast? Of course, it's Alive Advocacy Movement.com. AliveAdvocacyMovement.com if you want to find out more information about what is happening regarding all matters vaping in Australia right now. Get on board, hop on into the website, join us, help create some change maybe, educate others so that they can learn more about this issue, obviously than our politicians do at the moment. But look, before we get a little bit too narky and we get into things, look, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast and supporting us, and wherever you are, please feel welcome to put a comment below, whether you're on the Spotify, the YouTube, or on our website. Feel welcome to pop in a comment. I love to hear from you and what you've got to say. And also, don't hesitate once you're on our website to hit that join us button. We won't bite. We're all a great community here, and as we welcome another member from the fantastic Alive Advocacy Movement community, the one and only Brooke. Welcome.
Thank you. What a great introduction.
Awesome. Brooke, so you're a vapor.
Yes. I've been vaping now since about 2015. Was when I sort of first started getting introduced to it.
So you've quit smoking by vaping and been smoke-free for what, approximately 9 years, thereabouts?
Yeah.
And how does that make you feel generally? Like, what are the differences that you have felt since no longer smoking?
Well, I think for me, the sort of, I used to have a very sort of love-hate thing with smoking, where obviously, like, you have that first cup of coffee in the morning and a smoke, or you go out to the pub and have one. And I'll be honest, like, I used to really love it. But then you also sort of have that hate thing where, like, for me, example, especially as I started to get a little older, where I used to live, there was a train station about 15 minutes away. I used to walk there all the time to catch the train to work. And I remember one day I was sort of kind of breathing quite heavily and quite sweaty. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, this isn't good. Like a 15-minute walk like that, it was flat, wasn't up any hills. So it's sort of like,
Yeah, so you got to sweat up before you even went to work.
Yeah. And I sort of knew if I continued smoking, it wasn't going to end well.
Right.
But actually a family member got us one of those. They were really old. The e-cigarettes that look like an actual cigarette, like they had the sort of.
Yeah, I used to have one of those too. Yeah. And did that do it for you? Did that help you remain smoke-free?
So I was sort of curious about it, and I sort of gave it the drinks test, because anyone who smokes and drinks knows that when you have a few drinks, that's when you really.
Yeah, it's either that or with a coffee, and if it doesn't fix a hangover with a coffee in the morning.
Yeah, and so I mean, it was nicotine-free. I think they'd just gotten it from like a service station or something like that. It didn't get me off initially, but I smoked a lot less than I normally would. So I kind of had that thing of like, there's definitely something to this. Yeah. Like, it needs tweaking, obviously, but there's definitely, this has potential. And so then down the track, I got just like a black kind of pen-like ones that used to be around. You sort of don't see them so much anymore.
Yeah.
And I started off with that, and I was kind of using it more just to cut back on smoking. And then I think this is quite an important part of my journey, as it were. I had a friend at work, and he was pretty clued up. Now, I remember sitting outside in the smoking area, and I was puffing away on the vape. And he said to me, "Oh yeah, I tried those, but they're all with them. We found out they're full of like formaldehyde." And it's a bit embarrassing to sort of think, but I didn't actually sort of fact check this. So I kind of had that thing of like, oh, I guess it was too good to be true, sort of thing.
Oh,
and
no.
Yeah, and so for about 6 months, I sort of went back to just pretty much just smoking.
Wow.
Which is, it goes to show how misinformation sort of it has effect. And one day at work, I had some downtime. So I just, out of curiosity, I Googled e-cigarettes and formaldehyde. And when I looked at the actual study, I mean, the temperatures they were frying these coils at to get this formaldehyde result. I mean, anyone who vapes, you remember your first burnt coil, and there is no way you continue vaping on that. And I mean, it's essentially like if you turned your stove up as high as it would go, put a steak on like a frying pan, let your house burn down, then came back, collected the ashes of the steak, and then tested it and found some sort of scary sounding chemical, and went, see, steak is highly toxic.
Yeah, it certainly lacks a flavorful experience. And look, while we're at this point, I think we should inform the listeners and the viewers. Formaldehyde, it's one of the big active chemicals that has been definitely used to scare a lot of people away from vaping. Even as most recent in the past week or two through New South Wales Health and other government authorities. But it's disproportionate. It's totally disproportionate. Is there formaldehyde in vapes? Yes. Hear me out. Is there vapes in your breath? Yes. What? Seriously, everybody has a natural amount of formaldehyde in their mouth. Is there formaldehyde in water? Yes, there is. And let me tell you, I've done the studies and I've done the comparisons, and I did an average over all the studies that were done in the worst possible manners, as you explained there, Brooke, where they're done at the worst temperatures, jamming some poor ratatouille in a glass cylinder to inhale probably some of the worst situations possible. That is just... The comparison would be jamming a human in a old telephone box.
Yeah.
Actually, probably worse than that, half the size of that, and then just burning things at temperature that just do not equate. Anyway, so those levels of formaldehyde that were in comparison in drinking water, acceptable Australian drinking water standards, there was actually less formaldehyde found in the vape than what was accepted in Australian drinking water standards. So what that meant, or what that could potentially mean, is people, oh my God, stop sharing. If you've got steam coming off in the shower, oh my God, that is a higher level. That's a higher level risk than vaping. So stop sharing. I don't think so.
Hopefully not. It gets thinky.
So it occurs. We're not going to be embalming any bodies quickly, and it's just a very, very low amount. And compared to smoking, there is no comparison. We're talking less than 2 to 3% of the amount that you would find in cigarettes.
Yeah, there's a certain well-known brand of Big Pharma that has a quick mist product that
Oh
has
yeah,
hydrochloric acid listed in its ingredients. I mean, obviously,
yeah,
it's been tested to make sure it's safe. I mean, if it was just melting people's throats, I think it'd get taken off the market. But if
yeah.
you want to play the formaldehyde game, you can do the same thing with this product. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I keep saying, Brooke, I've tried killing weeds with e-liquid because apparently it's the same as weed killer. It's as harmful as weed killer. But you know what? I've poured e-liquid and I've even tried vaping over the weeds and they still won't die. Apparently it's the same as insecticide or insect killer. Look, I've tried vaping all over the poor little blowflies around here. None of them want to drop dead out of the sky. I've even tried drowning the little buggers, and they just swim out of it and fly away. So what are we being
Probably
told? What are we being told here?
exactly. Well, they're probably just left you with some very nice smelling weed. So, you know.
That's true. That's true. All right, so let's get back to the story here, Brooke. You're scared off. You're scared off for a little bit,
Yeah,
potentially. What, for about 6 months or so, you say?
yeah. So anyway, I sort of read this article and I had that immediate feeling of like, I've been had here. Like I've been conned into thinking that this is like some super toxic thing, and it wasn't even worth sort of bothering with. When that couldn't be further from the truth. So the thing that really did it for me was I sort of over time I'd been using a tobacco-y liquid that was a kind of caramel tobacco. And I sort of
Yeah.
started to realize over time that it wasn't so much the tobacco that I liked about the juice, but it was the actual caramel.
Right.
Like I'm a little bit of an outlier in the sort of e-juice world. I tend to lean more towards sort of chocolate, desserty flavour base. That's just what works for me.
I think that's
Um,
great. You've got to find what works for you, you know?
yeah, and
And another interesting statistic to throw in, that just over 80% of all vapors long term, over the past 12 months, normally are vaping something other than the taste of tobacco, mint or menthol.
yeah, I find like with this new thing about tobacco, the thing they're not really registering is that when you get off cigarettes and just say vape, it's the same as if you just quit cigarettes. You have the same effects. Your taste buds start to come back. Your sense of smell starts to come back. Like that's undeniable. So you with cigarettes, it was always more about you were getting your nicotine fix. It's not that the tobacco tasted particularly great. So I just
Yeah.
it's a weird argument against flavors that makes like no sense because you lose your sort of taste for tobacco. I found there was a shop in Melbourne that sort of did an in-house juice that was kind of a toffee caramel based thing. And I got a sub-ohm kit, which was sort of that was a real turning point for me. And everything just clicked. It wasn't even a struggle not having a cigarette. Like I wasn't even thinking about it. It was just like a light bulb went off sort of thing. And it was just like, this worked.
Yeah, right. So there's that disassociation of flavour of tobacco,
Yeah.
smoking, and you're right. Yep, I'm free from that. You're free from walking in and smelling and tasting like a bushfire, if you like. And you
Yeah.
found something that's nice and toffee and a little bit sweet and caramel, and well, what's wrong with that? Why can't adults enjoy sweet things too?
Yeah, well, the idea that you sort of you turn 18 and then you just eat unflavored tofu and drink water. I mean, who's doing that? Adults like chocolates and donuts and all sorts of different things.
Unflavored tofu. Yes.
Yeah,
That's a great comparison. And, would you hand an alcoholic something that tastes like beer? Is that a smart move? You've got that association. What are the triggers? Well, one of them is
yeah,
taste. And our triggers are our sensory system. And one of my most effective parts of our sensory system, our smell and our taste, right?
Yeah.
We rely on it for survival for everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So the turning point for you, I'm going to try and dig a little bit deeper
Yeah.
today with you, Brooke. Um, was you're walking to the station and you're just feeling, just hang on, this isn't good for me much longer. Was there any other motivational drivers that was, you know, that you've thought about along the way and thought, wow, oh, thank God I quit?
Um, Ironically, it was um, it will sound daft, but when I did smoke, I used to smoke in the house, and we adopted a young kitten, and
Right.
I sort of I felt bad about smoking in the house because I didn't want to sort of affect the cat in that way,
That's fair
or
enough. Absolutely.
potentially be responsible for it sort of getting ill and having
Yeah.
some sort of horrible disease. So, um, being a responsible cat dad, I suppose at the
There you
time,
go. Yeah.
it was also a sort of motivating factor, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest. When I was sort of smoking 2 packs a day, I mean, I probably sort of burst the bubble of the quit or die brigade, but it really, I didn't look at a picture of a manky foot on a cigarette packet and go, should quit. Like it had pretty much zero effect on me. I was just,
Yeah.
they were started to get to the stage where it was almost sort of comical how over the top the sort of plain packaging cigarettes were getting, you know.
Yeah, I remember in the workplace. I don't know if your workplace is a little bit bantery. It was like, well, this one's not so bad. It only harms my baby. It doesn't matter. I'm not getting
Yeah,
pregnant. I'm not going to get pregnant anytime soon.
yeah.
I'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Same here. I was pretty confident I wasn't going to get pregnant. So
Yeah. Well, it would be interesting if you did, and no
yeah,
judgment if you did. I'll just say that in this diverse world that we live in.
yeah.
Yes.
Aliens may be involved if that happens. So
Yeah, that's a probing we don't want to get into.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, no.
all right, let's move on. Look, obviously, over the last couple of years, especially, there's been all sorts of interesting media and moves by our health minister here in Australia, to basically make vaping very, very, very difficult to access. Uh, Without going too deep into that, I might extend on that later. How difficult are you finding vapes to access for yourself at the moment? And will you look at legally accessing vapes through a pharmacist, or have you even tried?
Look, I mean, I haven't really dipped my toes into the pharmacy model too much. I mean, I've got a prescription that I hope is some kind of protection against prosecution.
Right.
Um, Although they keep moving the goalposts, it feels like every week, so you're never really 100% sure. Um, the idea of having to go into a pharmacy and grovel and beg with some kid who has no idea about vaping, but has just been told by their boss, sell them the gum, sell them the patches, put them on the pills. Like, it's so demeaning and so degrading. And the worst part of all about it is for a lot of older people, it's just too much. So that they're just going to wind up returning to smoking. So it's an absolutely ridiculous model that makes no sense.
So, yeah, you don't feel comfortable with the experience, and maybe the lack of knowledge behind a counter. Look,
Yeah,
unfortunately, as part of all these changes, that we've gone from a model where we've had responsible, reliable, adults only vape specialist stores be now legislated out of the market and replaced in with black market businesses who don't give a rip. Or if you're not comfortable going there, you can go to a chemist. Yeah, it's kind of interesting though when you think about it, Brooke, is that
Yeah.
with cigarettes, we don't go to a chemist for cigarettes.
No, no, we don't. I think the big next step from the tobacco control merchants and Butler is, I think he's essentially just going to make sure that on single individual cigarettes there's something along the lines of like smoking's bad, okay, sort of thing. Like, wow, there'll just be hordes of people quitting because of that. Yeah,
Yeah, because it's breaking news. Yeah, think
that
people.
would have done it for me. You know, back when I was smoking 2 packs a day, that would have just ruled.
Yeah, people just become everyday blind to all that sort of thing. And of course, I mean, look, in this cost of living crisis, of course, the elbow government right now is all about making sure that the big supermarkets are giving us a great deal and lowering our prices. And in Mark Butler's helping push that barrow. And and look,
Yeah.
if anything, I think he's helped really lower the prices on cigarettes. I understand they're about 30% of the current price uh, that legal cigarettes from your local supermarkets are. So I guess he's winning in that regard. Yeah,
Yes. Well, the other great thing is, little Johnny after school goes to his black market tobacco shop, and I think he will sort of eventually do the math where his illegal disposable vape is sort of north of $50, and his pack of Marlboro Reds or whatever it is like 15 to 20, and it's almost as if Butler is sort of willing the gateway to smoking theory into becoming some kind of reality. Yeah.
yeah, but will they really take notice of little Johnny having a smoke behind the shed? Maybe as they did back in my day. Um,
Yes.
the focus is all on the vapors. Quick, get on the vapors. Oh, don't worry about little Johnny down the back there having a smoke. He's all right.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something, Brooke. I had an interesting conversation with a lovely lady last night, and she said, to me, it seems like parents these days would be less outraged if they discovered a crack pipe in their school children's backpack when they got home than a vape. They'd be less outraged to see a crack pipe than a vape. And I think that says it all.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, you sort of, I've heard anecdotally of sort of people smoking or returning to smoking because they now think with the sort of misinformation being spewed out by the government that somehow smoking's a better alternative. I can't verify its accuracy, but I did see someone on Reddit say that they'd actually had a doctor recommend that they use smoking to quit vaping.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Which is
How
that's
does this
mind.
make how does this make you feel, Brooke? As somebody who knows the power of quitting smoking with vaping for a long time and being able to remain smoke free for nearly 9 years or so, how does this make you feel to know that there are up in the last 12 months, according to the latest Roy Morgan survey, 300,000 vapors have stopped vaping, and presumably a lot of them go back to smoking. That's a lot in the last 12 months. How does that make you feel?
It's a public health disaster. I mean, there's no understating just how horrific that is, and it's a very, on a personal level, it's a very unsettling feeling of basically having your government sort of designate you as sort of lesser than because of what has been a legal sort of lifestyle choice. I mean, I'm married. I've been with my wife for around 20 years. I work full time. I pay my taxes. I pay my bills. I pay my mortgage. Don't have that much after all that, but I pay my way.
Hey,
Um,
yeah,
you
same
know,
as
I
most.
yeah, I don't do drugs. I don't have a criminal record. I certainly never hung outside of school with like a big trench coat and a bunch of disposables in them, going hey, kids, you want to look cool? Like a mind my own business sort of thing. I sort of tick all the boxes for being on the straight and narrow. And now with everything, I'm made to feel like I'm some sort of junky criminal that needs to sort of be monitored and watched and shunned or something. And it's just so ridiculous.
It certainly is. I was gonna ask you, no, I will ask you. Complete this sentence and pretend that Mark Butler and Elbow and Australian Public Health are all right in front of you now. Start the sentence with, "Hi, I'm Brooke. I want you to make these changes because."
Yep. So, hi, I'm Brooke. I want to see a regulated market in Australia because I think that is going to save a lot of lives. The the current get back on the SIGs and save the kids public health position is incredibly warped. There's no comparing it to anything overseas that's working. Like it's just absurd.
I think it was a great call. And yeah, and look, where to now? Look, things might even get a little bit more draconian. How could they possibly get more draconian than it is now? Maybe online pharmacy access may be restricted in the future. Maybe we might get criminalised. Heaven help us, for actually possessing a vape. Um, how does that sort of rhetoric make you feel, Brooke?
It's grim, but it is accurate. I mean, I sort of the optimist in me would sort of is clinging to the hope that this eventually does morph into some kind of regulated market. And I mean, if that happens, I'd be really happy. I'm okay if it's plain packaging and it just says, like on the e-juice and it just says banana or something, and it's not called like unicorn milk or whatever. That doesn't really bother me that much. The worst case scenario, and I can kind of see is I'm quite concerned about this 3-year review that got thrown into all the changes, because what I can see happening is in the build up to that review, Butler saying, well, we've seen an increase in youth smoking, which he'll use the gateway theory that, the vaping led to the smoking. And then he will also say with the pharmacy model, because I mean, it's pretty much as it is designed to fail. He will say, because there's been such a low take up on it, there's no real proof that vaping helps people quit smoking. So why don't we just ban it altogether? The people, I'll put out the disclaimer that I'm not a member of the Dutton fan club. I'm not telling anyone which party to vote for, but I kind of see Labor voters occasionally on social media forums, and they seem to be under the impression that the Butler's sort of got his pound of flesh, and that, if another sort of full Labor government that's not like a minority government or whatever will basically just leave it as is, kind of thing. But I see the complete opposite happening if that were to occur. I mean, at the moment, if you vape and you vote for Labor, I mean, it's pretty much like cows voting for McDonald's. Like, it's not going to end well. That's just the ugly truth. I mean, you don't have to vote for the Liberals if you don't want to. I mean, there's some great independent parties out there that really, the more support they get, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And, it's interesting that I've noticed that, interesting you mentioned that and you bring that up, Brooke. I've noticed definitely more Labor voters, or this statement being repeated over and over again.
Yeah.
I've voted Labor all my life, but I never will again. And, I'm not to push any barrow for any party. I am the quintessential swinging voter. I will vote for what I think is good, probably along with about 40 or 50% on a rising base of voters in my seat, I think, these days.
Yeah. Well, one thing too I noticed is now after having been in the political wilderness for years, they certainly weren't screaming from the rooftops on the campaign trail that they were going to ban recreational vaping for adults because they wanted those votes. So they kept that quiet. Then they came up with this weird sort of, oh, it's about the kids, it's about the kids. Now they seem to have completely forgotten about the kids,
Mm.
and
Uh,
then they're just randomly targeting adult vapors.
well, it's interesting you mentioned that word recreational vaping, and I'm going to make this point with you while I've got the Brooke. Is what is the difference between recreational vaping and therapeutic vaping? I want the listeners to hear this and hear it loud. The vapes that are now available in chemists with or without a prescription or over the counter or not, depending on what state you live in, the list of vapes that the TGA say it's okay to sell, but they're not approved. They're not approved. Those lists of vapes are the same vapes, very similar vapes to what was available in those specialist vape stores that have now been forced to close. Only difference is that inflated prices. So we've got
Mm.
vape specialist stores selling what? Recreational products? Oh no, hang on, but they're on a therapeutic list. So, checkmate. They are no different. There is no difference between recreational and therapeutic. There is only, like any products in the world, there are differences in quality, flavors, types, varieties, etc. Some may be better, some may be worse. I say let's get rid of the worst ones. Let's keep the better ones. And yeah, as you say, Brooke, I'm with you today. I think we regulate it maybe disproportionately safely through licensed retailers that are accessible. Maybe a place where people can normally buy harmful 2 out of 3 deaths combustible tobacco products. Um, I think that's a place for them to be. Surely, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no argument from any side that smoking's going to kill you. Yeah, no, there's no debate.
Yeah.
And I think what sort of unfortunately seems to have been deliberately ignored. Like I can remember when I was sort of fairly new to the whole vaping thing, I can think of a very prominent Melbourne vape shop that when the politicians themselves were sort of a bit behind on like what's this newfangled electronic cigarette thing, they actually self-regulated and imposed their own age restriction, even though there was no requirement for them to do so. This narrative from Butler that all vape shops were like, let's hook a new generation of kids on nicotine. These stores were regulating themselves before the government even knew what to do, and they were being responsible about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and even though a lot of them completely disagreed with the weird stance on nicotine that was sort of around at that time, you could walk into their shop and you could have been one of their biggest customers, and you could scream and cry and throw a tantrum, and they would still refuse to sell you juice with nicotine in it because they were compliant. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yet there weren't the laws in place necessarily to really protect that hard enough. Although small doses or low dose or any dose nicotine used to be, I think, a Schedule 7 poison. Of course, it's been scheduled at low doses now, up scheduled where we can get a prescription or over the counter for adults, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but you're right. We can self-regulate, and the conspiracy theory of, I think you forgot to mention 2 words there. Big tobacco are hooking a whole new generation.
Oh,
This is what Mark Butler keeps saying is big tobacco keep hooking. This is some sort of conspiracy. But big tobacco are hooking a whole generation of kids onto nicotine. Well, one, nicotine's not carcinogenic by itself. Wait, what? That's correct. No carcinogens in nicotine, but this isn't a ploy by Big Tobacco. We wish it was only that simple. We would know where the target was. We hate Big Tobacco. Probably, well, at least I'll speak for myself. They killed my grandmother and my grandfather, and we don't want them necessarily hooking another generation on something that's harmful. But big tobacco have not played a prominent role in the Australian vaping industry or market, if at all. But seriously, only up until Butler's latest legislation and regulation measures, which saw, literally for the first time, legalisation of big tobacco vapes sold in chemists. Did you know that, Brooke?
Yeah, yeah. I would have liked to have. I would dearly love to have been a fly on the wall between that little backroom meeting between Butler and his associates and some big tobacco people. It'd be to be able to leak that to the public would be delicious. But
Yeah,
fortunately,
one can only speculate. Apparently, they don't take
yeah,
money from big tobacco, but one can only speculate. I mean, really, the only legal big tobacco vape product in Australia is sold only because, or only been encouraged because they can be sold in a chemist with Butler's new regulation or the Australian Health Minister's new regulation.
well,
Interesting times.
sorry, I
All right.
I remember the sort of back when I was sort of fairly new to everything. All the vape shops didn't really like, with big tobacco trying to sort of crack into the market. I remember there was the Juul and the Blue, but none of the vape shops was stocking it because people knew it was big tobacco and they just wouldn't buy it. You know.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, the history that I've studied is that there was two parts of almost bugger all, as far as those two brands were concerned, in on the Australian market.
Yeah, yeah. It never took off. I mean, I remember they kind of had the Juul thing in America where they were trying to sort of drum up the whole sort of they're hooking the kids kind of thing, but it never took off in Australia. I mean, Greg Hunt sort of flailed about trying to create this youth vaping thing, but he just backward it was sort of sub-owned boxes and mods and stuff, and RDAs and whatnot. It didn't have any legs, you know.
Yeah, it hasn't got any legs. It hasn't gone anywhere. The teen vaping rate in the US, since they drummed up the whole dual conspiracy, has basically seen the lowest vaping rates they've seen in 10 years over there right now. And you know what? Funny enough, the lowest smoking rates I've ever seen as well. So, uh, obviously that doesn't mean there's a gateway to smoking if that's what's happening. Interesting. And we happen to have the same thing to a degree here in Australia. Smoking
Yeah,
rates aren't going through the roof
I
here
just I
until
failed
they're
to
available again.
I failed to see how you could go from, say, like a strawberries and cream vape and go, you know what? I really want a cigarette that tastes like a hobo's armpit. That's what I'm really craving right now. Yeah, I get this sweet tasting strawberry and cream thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, look, hey, Brooke, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a fun chat and a great podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun learning a little bit more from just average man in the street. Maybe it's slightly bit above average, Brooke, but hey, the man in the street here in Australia are just giving his honest thoughts and opinions and your story with us. It's absolutely awesome that you can do this, and not everyone will relate to every podcast here on Staying
Yeah.
Alive, but they might just flick through and go, "Who's that Brooke? He sounds like an excellent guy."
Thank you for having me.
No, that's all right. I agree. He's an excellent guy. Thank you so much for joining us, Brooke. This has been the Staying Alive podcast. We'll be back with another one very, very soon. Make sure wherever you are to subscribe, hit the stars, do whatever you got to do to follow us on all the social media platforms so you can see more of our fantastic content and information. Also, another reminder, make sure you get to a live advocacy live advocacy movement.com, and yeah, join us if you want to know a little bit more, if you want to be part of a community where we talk about ways to survive this crazy situation we have here in Australia. you want to help try and create a little bit of change, help educate others so that they can also learn more about the real science, the evidence-based science on vaping, please, by all means, check out the QR code which will appear on the screen now, and also at the end of this as well. Thanks again for joining us, Brooke.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Let's do a bit of boogie. I don't know, stand alone. Boogie on an alley.
We can try to understand New York Times.